think I'll open up. My name is Dee Sandall, Reverend Dee Sandall, and I am a volunteer with the Center of Addiction and Faith, working with Ed Treat, our director. And we have been bringing this book club so people get to know more information. And sometimes we don't always get to read it ourselves, but we hear somebody else share it for us. And so that's what we're doing here today. Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we know that we aren't always open to hearing what you have to say, and we just pray that we can open our minds and hearts to follow, to be brave enough, to have courage, like Christina, that do something, to make changes. And we just pray that you give us all the right direction for each one of us using our own gifts. We lift it up in your name. Amen. So we have been 2 weeks now doing the book Curious by Christina Dent. And she talked to us about what was basically what she was looking at, changing things and looking at the backstory. And then the next week she went on caring more about the people. And so this week we look forward for her to summarize and bring us home, and she always opens it up to questions as we go. So without further ado, I'll open up to Christina.
Fantastic. Thanks for being back, everybody. It's great to see you guys. I'm going to start by answering a couple of the questions that were left from last week that we didn't get to. And then really, I'm just going to open it up to conversation and ask questions to you guys about what you found most compelling in the book. I want to know what you found most challenging, and like I don't know that I'm with you there, like really finding those wrestling places. I would love to hear that. And it does not bother me if you haven't read the whole book. That is not a big deal. So to start out, somebody had asked, what are the most significant steps of progress that we've seen since we started? So I'll caveat this by saying we don't charge to come and speak anywhere. So this is not a financial thing for us, but the increasing quantity of audience that we can reach on podcast, it's very much a stair step of kind of podcasts with bigger audiences want to know, have you done podcasts with similar audiences before they have you on? So that kind of building over time of getting to bigger and bigger audiences has been really exciting, and very conservative audiences. So yesterday was on Tudor Dixon's podcast, very conservative. Another Capitol Report on another very conservative TV media platform. So it just has been encouraging. We will talk to anybody, but generally speaking, it tends to be conservatives and people of faith who are more, they tend to be the ones who are pushing back against changes to drug policy in states. And so partially because that's my own background and where it's the language that I speak most fluently. And partially because that's just where we see strategically for change to happen. It feels like a great place for us to be working to try to reach more and more of those audiences who might not already be thinking about shifting our approach to drugs and addiction. So that has been really encouraging. We don't do a whole lot of lobbying work. We're only a 501c3, so we're limited on that. But here in Mississippi, we had fentanyl testing strips that were legalized last year. And we've had a lot of, even beyond that, a lot of interest from Republican legislators in our work. We hosted an event, and the opening comments were given by a Republican state representative in his home community. So he didn't feel like that was going to, shoot his chances at re-election if he was publicly associated with us. And yeah, just a lot of great relationships. People, they love that they can work with us on some things and they don't have to agree on everything. And he even said that, he said, I don't know, I'm not with you guys on everything, but I love the heart behind what you do. I'm with you on some of the kinds of policy changes. And so not feeling like they're going to be pigeonholed, or that we're going to say, hey, look at so-and-so, they agree with everything we say, that's built a lot of trust. And so that has been encouraging. So that movement into where, you know, on Tudor Dixon's podcast yesterday, she said out of the gate, you know, it's just crazy that we're arresting people for, it just hasn't worked. It's unhelpful. It is destroying people's lives. So that's just encouraging. You're seeing that from people who are very conservative, who are, they don't see that as it used to be that, you know, if you question that, then your conservative credentials were questioned. And there's definitely becoming a much more of an openness to, you know, hey, if it doesn't work, it doesn't have to be part of kind of the value system. So that has been encouraging. Certainly a lot of work to do there, but encouraging. Someone else asked, how do you overcome lobbies? Lobbies are incredibly powerful at the state level and at the federal level. I think about it as you can do it two ways. You can build a bigger lobby, a more powerful lobby, which is difficult to do because lobbies, in all the different ways that the drug war has played out, are incredibly powerful. Law enforcement lobbies, prosecutors lobbies, prison lobbies, all of those things. So you can lobby on the other side, but the only voice, the way I think about it is the only voice that is more influential and powerful in a politician's mind than the lobbyists that they tend to hear from, because that's their full-time job, is get in the ears of people who make laws, is the voices of voters. And that, you know, they no longer, the lobbyists only matter as long as you're elected. So if you lose that seat, then what the lobbyists want or don't want from you doesn't matter. And so it is true that when you are elected, it tends to be the most powerful voice is lobbyists in your ear. And yet, if people believe that their constituents will not support what a lobbyist is telling them, they are unlikely to follow through with that. So that building of public support for something is crucial, because there's a Republican legislator here in Mississippi, and I can't remember if I told you guys the story or not, but we had been, you know, hosting events. We had hosted an event in his community, and he came out publicly in the media saying, I don't think we should be arresting people for marijuana. And the media in Mississippi had a heyday with that, because here's a, you know, Republican legislator. And so he sends us a text and he says, hey, you guys have got to keep doing your work, because you've got to provide cover for people like me who are trying to publicly say, hey, our mind has changed on this. And it's a lot to ask them to be the ones to just go risk it all out there on the public square. Like, it's too high of a risk. So for people who don't have as much at stake, who aren't elected people, we can play that role of helping to change public opinion and help to talk about it publicly, so that when a politician talks about what they think, they're not risking their seat. So lobbies are really powerful. The voices of voters are the only thing that can be more powerful. But a lot of times there's a mismatch, because the voters aren't actually telling their elected officials what they really think. They're sort of just listening to what they say, and then they privately say, I don't know, I don't think this is really working. So for our officials to know what we actually want, we've got to be able to tell them that and to say it publicly, and for them to hear it in the media that they're listening to hear it from constituents, to hear it when they're back in their districts. That's what's going to help overcome that power of lobbies. Someone else asked, how do we build bridges? What are kind of tangible ways that we practice bridge building with people? We are always looking to proactively go meet with people who are opposed to our position. Not to go lay out our case and say, did we convince you? But just to build relationships, to extend goodwill, to show that we are not out to get them. We're not enemies. There's no our side and your side. We genuinely do want to find wherever there might be commonality and opportunities to work together and be able to do that. So a big part of that is that we don't tell people that they're wrong. even if they are wrong, like verifiably wrong, even if the data that they're saying is wrong, people are never convinced when they're angry or when they're feeling defensive. It's like impossible for a human mind to simultaneously be defending itself and to be going, oh yes, I am being convinced. It just, those things are kind of opposed. So we're always trying to provide education in a way that does not directly confront something that has just been said. And so that has been really helpful for us. And we tell people that at events, when we ask them to give feedback on presentations, we say, we're not going to tell you that you're wrong. So you can give us your real unfiltered opinion as long as you're respectful, but we're not waiting to jump on you when you say something that there's better data on or something like that. So Ed just said, when I say we, who am I talking about? So that's End It for Good, which is the nonprofit that I work for, I started, and that houses all of this work, including Curious. So I wrote Curious on End It for Good time. End It for Good owns the copyright of that. It's part of why End It for Good puts so much work and program into promoting the book. It's not just because they like me. It's that the book is a piece of our programmatic work over the course of this year, especially. So that is who we are, and then we are funded through a bunch of different foundations, individuals, and that sort of thing, just like any other 501c3 is funded in that way. So that's what I say when I say we. And also just ways, so it's easier for us to find ways to build bridges because it's what we do full time, all the time. So in thinking about what did I do when I was not working, this was just sort of a passion project of mine. That's when I started writing articles and submitting them to newspapers and realizing, oh, anybody can write something and submit it to a newspaper. Like, you don't have to be a journalist to do that. You can write it for their opinion column. And that's what I did. And that's what gave me a sense of like, oh, you can actually share what you think with the world. That's pretty amazing. So that is great. Just look for what is around you. I think people have all different avenues. Some people are part of a book club outside of this. Some people are part of a task force of some sort. I was talking to a book club last night who a mom who had lost her child to an overdose, and she went and joined her local like drug prevention group, and is now helping to kind of change how her community thinks about drug prevention, not just this let's try to scare people and crack down, but let's educate honestly and try to reduce harm. So there's lots of different pathways. Some people love to go talk to their elected official. My husband works for a senator doing casework, and there are some people who just love nothing more than picking up the phone and giving their opinion to their elected official. For some people, that's terrifying. So look for what is it that's kind of your gift. Are you a really relational person? Do you like to write? Do you like to be on social media? And go find the place where you have some sort of outlet that feels natural to you, I think is the best way to think about the way that you might be able to build bridges. And then the last one before we head into discussion, Robert had asked, what are some good questions to start conversations with people rather than just kind of telling people something? So for me personally, I find it very difficult in a one-on-one conversation to introduce these ideas. It feels so, the other person's mind is kind of running 1,000 miles an hour while they're trying to follow maybe a big new idea or something that feels like it might really push on things that they believe. So even now, even though I've worked in this, full-time for 5 years and passion project for 2 years before that, I'm very hesitant to start a one-on-one conversation with someone just because of that. So I'm always looking for ways where I can be talking to people and they can be listening, but they don't feel what feels to them maybe an overwhelming focus on them and what they think. And so that's why I like things like sharing something on social media, or writing something for your local paper, or going to a local meeting of some sort and sharing some ideas to a group. I know that's not comfortable for a lot of people, but just think about social media. You don't have to. It allows people to learn without feeling this like face to face, oh my, what am I going to say to these ideas? So that's just maybe that's just my own personal preference. I think some people are much better one-on-one at communicating ideas. I tend to, I'm much more comfortable with a group than I am one-on-one in sharing ideas. It's probably the opposite for a lot of other people. That's just how my personality works. So I think it's when I started sharing things on social media, I had very few people that would engage with it on social media, but people would tell me offline, hey, I've been reading what you've been posting on social media and it's interesting. I've never thought about that before. Or, my son has been struggling and I just appreciate the compassion that kind of comes through in your writing and things like that. So people are reading, but finding those ways to kind of put those ideas forward where they don't perceive that as sort of a confrontation to their point of view, I think is probably the most important thing. All right, I'm going to just turn it over to conversation on Curious for those who have read it, the ideas in it. For those who haven't, I'm guessing you're all pretty familiar with that. So I would love to, I'm just going to open it up for people to give feedback and your own thoughts on things you found compelling, things you took issue with. I love that sort of thing. I think that's where we learn, is where we kind of wrestle through differences. So I'll open it up here and just unmute yourself. And then if you will click a hand raise on your, trying to think of how to do it without the awkwardness of people sort of wondering who's going to unmute and who's not. Trying to find if there's a hand raise feature on here.
Oh, no.
I cannot immediately find it.
Under the react button.
Under the reactions button. Yeah. All right, there we go. So if you go to the reactions button on the bottom of your menu, you can say raise hand. So pop that. If you are open to sharing something, it doesn't have to be mind-boggling. Just sharing what you think would be amazing. And yeah, somebody just start us off. Give your thoughts.
Oh, hi. It's Karen. Anyway, yeah, thank you. I haven't finished the book. I've been like super stressed trying to do some work right now. But I started it and I did read Chasing the Scream. And it's so funny. Like I think I had said last week, like I am for like legalizing drugs because of so many different things. The prison rate and also the stigma, like you're like a criminal, you can't even get your wife back. My thing is, and I think I know kind of the answer, and I'm sorry I didn't finish the book. Like I feel like, and I do remember reading that it's going to tip to another side before it balances out. And to my fear is that like I mentioned last week, going to New York and it just smells like pot. Like you feel like you're the only one not like smoking pot. And it's so extreme because it's legalized now. Like I almost feel like, is it going to go like tip to that, and that it's going to be like a free for all for a while before it balances out? And in that case, I get concerned, even though I'm like totally for the legalizing because it's just the way it's ludicrous what's going on. I get concerned about the mental health of our society today because people are just so stressed, like me right now, stressed and overwhelmed and just trying to like meet bills. And honestly, they are like the drug use is just like more rampant than it was 100 years ago, obviously. So do you feel like the focus, if we take the focus off the war on drugs, is there going to be a better support system in the mental health for like focusing on healing people and not just jailing them, things like that? What do you see for the future on that? Is there
Yeah, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that. Curtis, I'd love for you to hop in too, because you've worked on marijuana policy for so long, kind of what your reflections are.
Yeah, sorry, is this too loud? I've got my air conditioner on. Can you hear me? Okay. Um, yeah, I think there very well might be a pendulum swing too far in one direction and then sort of a correction. That's often how policy change sometimes occurs. Sometimes it's also just an incremental reform. And by doing it that way, things can slowly get to an equilibrium. But I mean, back in the 50s, I'm sure that walking around New York City, you smelled tobacco smoke everywhere. And there were laws that got put into place over time to make it so you weren't able to smoke tobacco in certain places or within certain distance from a door. And I think the problem is that a lot of these policy concepts just haven't been able to mature because we've been focused in one specific direction for so long that we haven't really used the muscles and they've atrophied, where we try to account for the fact that certain people don't want to smell cannabis in a public place. But the problem is we don't allow using cannabis in any private establishments right now. Even in New York City, you can't go into a private club or a private establishment like a bar and smoke cannabis inside. And so if you can't smoke inside, and then we have laws that say you can't smoke outside, it creates quite a conundrum. And here in Minnesota, this upcoming March, even though cannabis is legal to possess and use, we're going to make it so if you live in any apartment that has more than 3 units in it, you're not able to smoke cannabis in your apartment building because, probably rightfully so, we don't want neighboring apartments to smell like cannabis. But if you can't smoke inside, you can't smoke in a private establishment, and then you can't smoke outside. It's like a confusing problem.
I don't think for me, it's not like it's offensive. I mean, it is bothersome. I really don't want to get high just walking down the street. That I just feel like everybody is smoking. I mean, honest to God, you could sit in a restaurant and you start to get high because the windows are open. It's like unbelievable. I'm just saying, like, I feel like with the legalization of pot, suddenly everybody is doing it, at least in New York or in Denver when I was there. But my concern again is like a mental health issue, like with so many people that are suffering, like the legalization. But then again, right now, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. Right now, it's like they say in the book, Chasing the Scream, it's easier for kids to get drugs in a parking lot than to get alcohol. I'm just saying, like, I just feel like so many people like are suffering right now. And I just feel like it's going to be beyond pot, that people are just like really drugged up. And I guess it is going to swing one way for a while. I don't know.
I think it's a good thing to keep our fingers on, of trying to prevent as much of that pendulum swing as possible, which I think is possible in some times. But sometimes we get so angry about the one approach, we just go, let's just move all the way in the other direction. And that's actually not what very many people want at all, but it's sort of where we end up. So I think we can stay aware of that. Bob, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure I'm coming through. 2 things. First of all, I'm a Lutheran pastor, retired, so I process theologically and biblically. The law kills, the spirit makes alive, comes to us from Corinthians. And I'm just thinking about how litigated to death, literally, we've become. And we just keep, even though it's not working to litigate, to create laws, we just keep making more of them. So when will we ever learn? That's one question. I guess I would welcome your thoughts. The other one is, Christina, could you just, I'm on chapter 24, so I'm nearing the end here. Just ignore the phone in the background. Sorry. Could you give us a taste of what the end game of um, your book is. What's the last word where you're going? Because the presentation is compelling, the stories are tragic, and what we're doing isn't fixing anything. And so what does it say in the last chapter? What do we do? What's the conclusion?
Yeah,
But I won't read the rest of it.
my conclusion is I think we need two kinds of change. One is kind of a heart change, and one is a mind/policy change. And so I see those things as can happen simultaneously, can also be separate. It may be that some people will come to the conclusion, no, I don't feel comfortable changing any kind of policies, but now I can better interact with loved ones in my life who are using substances or who are struggling with addiction. That's the kind of thing that I hope churches particularly would take up, is for there to be a major shift in how we think about substance use and addictions, and how we approach people who are struggling, how we approach family members who are struggling. All of that can happen with no policy change at all. And I think it's more likely to happen with policy change, because that label of criminal is so difficult for people to overcome. It's difficult for people who are labeled that way to overcome. It's difficult for the general public to overcome that label that's on other people. And so I think that policy change can help that. But ultimately, that sort of heart change, culture change, and how we think about drug use and addiction and the core problems that are at play there is really important to me. And the policy change is also important. I see that on a continuum of change, where there's probably going to be a large number of people who might be able to come with us, here. And then as we go further and further to the tip of the spear, there's going to be fewer and fewer people who are comfortable with that level of change. So I think it's both of those things. In my mind, when I look at what's causing problems, policy-wise, I have not been able to be convinced that keeping drugs illegal is going to reduce harm in any way, other than a few people who might not be using them right now wouldn't be using them. But the level of harm that is inflicted upon all the people who are currently using them, in order to get that, however small that slice of people is who aren't using at all, that's a really, really heavy price to pay. Incredibly significantly costly in lives lost, and in just the level of harm that we are enduring. I think it's my belief that if the United States had to live under all of the harms from the drug war in the same way that other places in the world do, we would have ended it a long time ago. As much harm as we do feel on the crime front related to kind of gangs being involved in the underground drug market, et cetera, if we had bodies hanging off of bridges that had been killed and decapitated, and what our neighbors in Central and South America have to live with, I think we would have rethought the forcing of markets underground long before now, and been much more open to that. So I think there's things like that are not particularly related to addiction. So if addiction is kind of people's primary motivator, they might be able to say, I'm just not comfortable with, the market changes, bringing those markets legal. Addiction I see as one component. It's one marker of whether or not our drug policy is effective. Rates of drug use is a marker. Rates of addiction is a marker. Rates of overdose is a marker. Rates of crime is a marker. Rates of corruption is a marker. So I think of it as it's a wide variety of all these different markers that are signifiers of whether something is effective or not, or whether it's actually working. And so when I look at that full picture, that's what leads me over and over again back to legally regulated markets. How we get the best approach to legally regulated markets, I think that's a painful process of figuring that out. But prohibition, I am convinced, does not offer us anything that the only thing it offers is some number of people who aren't going to try a substance, who just aren't trying it because it's illegal. Although I think if you go poll the audience and see how many people are dying to try heroin and haven't just because it is illegal, I think you're going to struggle to find very many people that are in that group. For cannabis, I think that's a much larger number of people, but you get into harder drugs and you get a much smaller number of people who want to go that route, want to experiment with more risky substances, and yet just feel that they can't because of, that it is illegal. So, Erin.
Just for this is not what I was going to talk about, but just to, for the group of people that I work with police, there's so many of them who are coming to understand that, addiction is not a moral failing and that it's a medical issue, but they're stuck in this gray area where they have a job to do. Using drugs is illegal, and without policy change, they're just kind of stuck there where they have a job to do. And we're asking them to do all of these things and work in all these programs, not just us, across the country. There's a lot of deflection programs opening up, and they're just kind of stuck in the middle without our laws changing. And I don't know how many of them are open to the idea of regulated drug markets or things like that. But with it, they very often operate in black and white, where they do exactly what they're told, and they like to fit everything into a box. And so if we tell them, don't arrest someone for possession because this is a medical issue and we're going to get them care, that's what they'll do. And so it's just really hard to ask them to work in this gray area. And they're really the gateway to incarceration and all of those things that come after that. So that's just something I wanted to add on after you said that. But I have I took notes when I was reading this book, and I have a whole kind of when you said, let's talk about the book, I highlighted a couple of things that I just wanted to read that really stood out to me and touched me as I was reading the book, and really felt important to me as I talk about the book with other people. And it started with just my husband, who just kind of stares at me like, oh my gosh, she's talking about work again. But these are things that I think will be impactful in discussing the book with other people who may or may not be willing to listen at first. And so some of these might be your exact words, Christina, and some of them might be just my iteration of what I read. But if I'm going on too long, just stop me. Prevention and harm reduction and reducing barriers to care are not issues related to drugs and addiction, but they're about life. These are pro-life issues. Another one that I thought was really important was many of us have empathy for people, but often that empathy is conditional and often only applies to people whose suffering we view as not having been tied to their own choices. And so when we can get people to really understand that addiction is a medical issue, and once you get to that certain point, it isn't a choice anymore. That's an important one. One that I really, really love is when you said that the sacredness of a person's life doesn't end when they make mistakes. That's just so important for all of us to remember, no matter what kind of mistakes a person has made. Here we said, I wrote down that demand drives supply, and history has proven we can't just decrease the demands for drugs by decreasing the supply. And in the absence of legal options, illegal markets will thrive. And then we want to consider whether or not drugs cause crime, and whether or not corrupt character is the driving force behind the sale of illegal drugs, or is it economics? Because I think that's just important thing to think about. This is one, I had a police officer who does one of our trainings. I said this to him while we were creating our latest training, and I said to him that this very line, the Al Capones of the 20s didn't give up their revenue stream by choice. They were put out of business by customers who chose to buy legal alcohol when it was available again. And bankrupting criminal organizations is a more effective way of fighting them than actually fighting them. And it was like a light bulb went off to him. He was like, we can keep our guys safe by doing things like this. So prohibiting drugs removes the option for any kind of quality control and introduces rampant contamination, which we've seen with xylazine and fentanyl and nitazines. And just let's see what else here. I love this one. With humility and curiosity, our blind spots become visible, and the best thing we can do is really dig in and do the hard work of change, which is, I think, what we're all doing here today. And just as we, have this conversation, we should remember that every fear a person has for what would happen if there were legalization is already happening every single day in every community in our country. We're pushing people away from medical professionals and toward professional criminals, which is a policy disaster. And then I just got two more. Sensibly regulating a wider range of drugs for legal adult use is compatible with values like limited government, fiscal responsibility, personal responsibility, employment opportunity, strong families, safe communities, and the sanctity of life. And that even if we move all drugs or move drugs back into legal regulated markets and stop arresting people for possession, we'll still have to address addiction. So it's not going to solve all of our problems, but it might give us money to better help people who are struggling. So those were all so important to me. And again, really appreciate the book.
Thanks for sharing, Erin. Who's got other comments? You can comment on what Erin shared or your own thoughts.
I'll jump in. So I liked a lot of those same points that, sorry, my daughter's over here itching to be on camera. But a lot of the points she brought up, another scene, I guess, that you kind of depicted was a scenario. Sorry, kids galore here. The scenario of you being in the courtroom, watching, I guess, the girl get sentenced, and you saw the situation with the man and his pregnant wife or fiance or whatever, and just your realization that it's not like Law and Order, that people don't have this opportunity to really defend themselves, and it just happens at such a fast pace, and that's happening every day all across the country, exponentially. Yeah, and it's just I thought it was very powerful and accurate depiction for people that just maybe don't know or hadn't thought of it, being like that. Sorry, so many distractions here. So
we all need some of that energy. She is just lighting us up with smiles. All right, others? Fred, what's going on in your mind? You're a great active listener. All of the head nods and the smiles. What are you thinking about?
So many things. You're really rocking my world. The book, these sessions. That's why I'm nodding, because I'm trying to say, yeah, I believe all this, and I'm knowing all this. I'm really trying to understand it. I realize just how much I've been socialized into drugs are bad, and at some point I have to do more research into, I guess you could call it recreational drug use. I've done lots of recreational alcohol use because I'm now in recovery, so much of it. And so just just trying to understand that. How do people use drugs? Because I talk about, they showed us Reefer Madness, and and that just was at a formidable age and just got me. So I'm trying to let that go. And that really works. I really appreciate, Christina, your approach, because I was waiting for, as I was reading the book, okay, when does the pushback come back? When does the hammer drop? And I really appreciate your approach, because it shows me that you can say it in a way that gets people thinking. And I like I think last week you had moving people to curious. You're not trying to get them moving too fast. And then my own personal confession, From somebody who grew up in New England and now I live in the northern Midwest, you have done so much to expand my view of Mississippi, and I truly, truly do appreciate that, and your stories, because obviously what we see on the news is really not what you're talking about, and that's why I keep coming back and nodding, because I'm listening to you going, thank you, Christina, for expanding my view of the world. So thank you.
Thanks, Fred. All right. Who else? Quinn, you were also doing a lot of wrestling last week when we were talking. Where are you at in your wrestling journey?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Unfortunately, I just got the book yesterday. So, but no, the simple question is, well, how about war on drugs? Well, how well is it working? I mean, it's really that simple. And I remember a year ago, one of my friends was with me and made an offhanded comment about, well, let's just legalize marijuana here in South Dakota. And I got to, it kind of caught me off guard. But what are you talking about? But a year later, as I think of my response, well, I didn't say anything. It just kind of blew me away. But I think several years ago, and with your experience, I remember a young gal I knew came into emergency here at the hospital, and she had been, well, using alcohol and marijuana, and she was pregnant. And I remember in the I forget all the medical stuff, but the 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 child within her was there was some problems in terms of her ingestion of it, and I remember the experience, because if you know what you're taking into your body is going into this child, why are you doing that? And that kind of experience has just stayed with me, and it's like I and some others work with some inmates who are on probation, and they, in once in a while, they'll, in spite of everything, they'll relapse. And the volunteers I work with, there's a mutual scratching of your head. That's stupid. Why are you doing that? I mean, there's the question. What's going on? And so that's kind of where I'm at these days. But thank you for asking.
Thanks for sharing.
Mhm.
All right, who else has got thoughts to share?
Okay.
Robert?
Yeah. One thing I was thinking that might change the dynamics of a conversation, at least for part of this issue, is to ask people, what can we do about drug policy or addiction that doesn't cost any money? Everybody talks about, well, maybe if we just build a wall, or if we just have, spend more money on police and stuff like that. But those things cost money, and we found out they're not too effective, but some people still think that it is. But if you start with the premise of, what can we do that doesn't cost any money? I can think of a few of when, let's say somebody, had an addiction problem and got arrested, has a lifetime felony. you know, those are things that just make it harder to maintain your recovery and abstinence. And I think it gets people thinking on a little bit different level if you start talking about what can we do that doesn't cost any money.
That's a great point. Things like expungements. I think I
Yeah,
remember I mentioned
expungement
last
is
week.
exactly.
Yeah, Michigan last year did a huge expungement, clean slate program that was automatic, so people didn't have to go hire an attorney to go file the paperwork. And I think it was almost, Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when you look at their population numbers and the numbers of people they thought were going to be impacted by that, it was more than just drugs, but it was all low level people who hadn't had further criminal justice involvement. It was almost 10% of Michigan's population that would be impacted by that clean slate legislation, which is pretty shocking, pretty amazing. So
yeah, I mean the principle behind making it a felony, drug possession a felony, is that it would deter people from using. But what deters people from possessing and using is assurance of being caught. And the higher you make the criminal penalty, just doesn't really have much effect. And if you look at the states that have the most draconian laws, you would think that, oh well, they're going to have fewer overdoses, but the data just doesn't show that.
yep. Yeah, that's a true a criminological fact on all crime, is that the deterrent is whether or not you believe you will be caught. It has nothing to do with how long of a sentence or how big of a penalty you believe that you'll get. It has to do with how confident you are that you will not be able to get away with whatever the thing is that you did. So our focus on let's just put them in jail for 20 years instead of 10 years. There's no deterrent effect in that. Lots of taxpayer costs, lots of societal costs, but no actual benefit on the criminal justice front. Other thoughts? Thanks for that, Robert. That's great. I love that. I've never thought about that. What can we do that didn't cost any money? And there's a bunch of stuff we could do.
Yeah, and there's a lot, because it's cheaper to put somebody in treatment than it is to incarcerate them. In Minnesota, just put through a law that they can vote. I mean, cleaning their records so that they can actually register them for voting now too. And I put on a question there about, has your organization thought of policies or strategies to change legislation? And as I was thinking about that, is what gives you more power is that you don't have something to tell them what to do that could create the tension. Instead, you just say, if something needs to be done. So, even though I brought up that question, just tell us exactly what you want to see. Then on the other hand, if you did tell somebody, it's like a pushback right away, of, well, that's not going to work or something like that. Leaving it open is hard, and it's hard to somebody already asked you, well, tell me at the end of the book, tell me what to do, and what to do is that we all need to get active and we all need to do something, and each in our own gifts, and on page 222, you did say 3 steps. And
yeah, I remember what that was.
yeah. And look at what's in front of you. And heart change and policy change are only possible as more people have the opportunity to get curious and learn. So look what's in front of you. Number 2, learn as much as you can about it. And number 3, jump in where we can contribute. It's so hard. Where can we contribute? And each of us just has to kind of figure it out. I'm working at our church right now trying to do that. And I'm going, I've been sober a long time and I know a lot about it. I've read a lot of it. I don't always know how I can contribute. And so I'm just keep plodding on, and I keep writing an article here and there. and it's not easy, and we're all just in it struggling. It's like you writing that question down. Oh, that's a good question. That's where maybe where I'll start next time, and each of us coming up with that question. Oh, I think I'll try that now. Me, I'm going to write an article about heart change and policy change. So I love that. I'm taking that off. That's my next article. So, but I'm going to turn it back to you. I just had my 2 cents.
Love it. And you're right. So I forgot to come back to your question about policies. We've really wrestled with how deep to get into policy work, whether we should start another arm that's not a C3, that's really more policy focused, and have shied away from that because we know that will begin making us enemies. I mean, anytime you're working more directly on policy, and we haven't wanted to shut down the big picture, big idea conversation with people by working in the weeds with them on particular things where there might be division. And yet we realize that there's a real opportunity when you win some policymakers over and they say, so what do we do? You don't want to be like, I don't have anything for you, go figure that out yourself. So we're still wrestling with that. We've gotten a little more involved in the last 2 years. Fentanyl testing strips was a great way to do that. That was we felt like it was a great, positive thing we could be part of. And some other things this year, a lot of defensive policy, trying to make sure harmful policy does not get across the finish line. Here in Mississippi, we've done some federal work with the Cannabis Freedom Alliance on education for policymakers, particularly conservative ones, around why ending federal cannabis prohibition is a good conservative policy stance. But you're right that it is challenging. And because we're working on such big picture ideas, we used to think nobody would want to talk to us in the legislature because of how far we are on the tip of the spear on where we think drug policy should head. And we found that actually, I think in large part due to our approach of respectful engagement, we've found policymakers are interested. So part of our work for next year is going to be digging into this and figuring out how much can we build out of sort of offering options that doesn't feel like it's a, flag in the sand. Agree with us or don't, we're going to fight you. But at least giving them some options for things that they can do that would, whether it's on the expungement side, whether it's on defelonizing a certain, first and second drug possession charges or something like that, some step that could be taken towards that. So one other question that someone had asked last week that I forgot about is how do you deal with pushback, which if you're going to go talk to anybody, you're going to get some pushback. A few principles that I always think about. People are never convinced of anything when they're angry. So if you're talking to someone who's already mad, the goal there is only preserving relationship and trying to find something that's understandable, that you can, some point of commonality where you can understand what they're saying or affirm that, yeah, that worries me too. I don't want more people addicted either, or whatever that might be. It's when people are in fight or flight mode, they're not in learning mode and they're not in critical thinking mode. The human brain cannot be in both of those at the same time. And so always trying to be in a conversation with people if we're talking about something that's harder. Always try to find the common ground, always try to find whatever the understandable part is between you and somebody else, even if you disagree on 99% of things. Is there 1% that you can agree on, that you can highlight that agreement? People always look to discredit the messenger so they don't have to deal with the message. So it's part of our commitment to respectful dialogue, to meeting people in the most professional way that we can, because we don't want to be an easily discreditable messenger. Because I think about that over the next couple of weeks, and you'll realize how much all of us do it. We look at, we hear something and we're like, the immediate thing is you don't even have to consider whether or not it's even true. If you can look at the source and, we start reading a news article, where do our eyes go to? It goes to where it's coming from. And then we categorize that. Well, of course it's crazy because so-and-so published it, or of course they're right because so-and-so published it. we're always looking at messengers. So trying to be a messenger that is coming with the most goodwill possible so that the message can shine through and not get discarded because the messenger is angry and abrasive or whatever. Also, no one is convinced in the weeds. So we really try to keep big ideas, just part of the challenge for us on policy, because policy is in the weeds. But on big ideas, trying to get people to wrestle with this big picture shift away from the criminal justice system for drugs and addiction. When you get too far down into the weeds, that people, they'll get stuck on some minutia, and they will then be unable to kind of think about the big picture. So we try to keep it big picture as long as that's the goal with that person, is to kind of keep it big picture. And then our work isn't for everyone. Not everyone is going to be interested. Not everyone is going to care about how we approach drugs and addiction. Not everyone is going to be open to our message, and that's okay. For me, it's important to just realize, hey, everybody has value, that not just people who agree with me. And, you know, if it's Aaron who's talking with a police officer who just is, you know, the rest of their career, they're going to be prosecuting and arresting as many people as possible. The goal isn't that we must convince everyone. It is, you know, for policy to change, you've got to hit, you know, 51% in most places. So you don't have to convince everyone. The work isn't for everyone. But there are a lot of people who are interested and open and looking for better solutions. And so just encourage all of you as you go about your work, and as we hit time here, to continue that work, continue moving these ideas out, continue sharing, continue learning. I think we can find a lot better solutions, and I'm really glad that all of you have joined in for the last couple of weeks and would love to stay connected. You can always email me at Christina@enditforgood.com.
Thank you very much, Christine. In the chat, we have posted where you can get a hold of the Addiction and Faith. And also Christina has put on there where to get the book, Chasing the Scream. Now, you know that will no longer be there the minute we close today, and that's within a couple of minutes. So if anybody's interested, please grab those right away. Announcements, we are having, the next speaker will be the plans he has for me. Whoa, that's coming in blurry, isn't it? Well, I got to change the background. Anyway, there. Whoops. Plans you have for me by Roseanne Fort. And that will be the 14th and 21st of July. And so there we go, from a big picture to 12-week daily devotional for freedom from alcohol. And again, she does not use necessarily a 12-step approach. And so it's looking at different ways, looking at that there isn't one answer for just this problem. It's a huge problem. And so thank you so much for these books that you've been sending out. And I am going to send them to our book club at our church, see if they'd be willing to do that. And our conference is this fall in October, around the 21st, I'm thinking.
17th and 19th.
Yeah, 17th to the 19th. I remember last year, it's the 21st, I think. And anyway, that will be online. So get your registrations in early. And any other questions or comments before I close? Otherwise,
Go ahead. The next book club were different than what Katie posted. She posted the 9th and 16th. You didn't say that, I don't think.
Okay, sorry, 9th and 16th.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. I always know that's Louise in my back of the head there. So anyway, without further ado, thank you so much for opening up our vision. Everybody write down one line that you think you can do with your gifts. What is it that each one of us can do? I'm writing my article.
Thank you, Christina, for doing
Love
this.
it.
Yes, go in peace, love and serve the Lord and one another. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.